protesting Democratic leaders in Chicago starting Monday of next week by the hundreds, if not thousands. There's some reporting to suggest that. Now, what is interesting will be how far away they are kept from the venue itself. Fox's Griff Jenkins has a primer on these preparations for the DNC. Let's watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2024 Democratic National Convention.
The stage is set after a dramatic change at the top of the ticket. The Democratic National Convention is set to kick off in Chicago Monday.
We'll have the most important historic moment when Vice President Kamala Harris accepts her nomination for President of the United States.
President Joe Biden will speak Monday, passing the torch. Then, former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton will headline Tuesday and Wednesday before Tim Walz and Kamala Harris take the stage to accept their nominations. But the unity may not extend outdoors, where protesters are expected to turn out in force.
We will be there. We will chant Free Palestine. We will say stop U.S. aid to Israel.
With approximately 50,000 activists and convention participants expected to come to Chicago for the convention, Chicago police are focused on keeping everyone safe while also protecting free speech.
If you want to express your First Amendment, please do so. But do it within the boundaries of the law. And as long as that occurs, then people will have their voices heard.
Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are reportedly planning a rally in Milwaukee on the second day of the DNC. And the Trump campaign says they're planning events next week to counter the convention. In Washington, Griff Jenkins, Fox News.
Griff, thanks so much. In the meantime here, let's bring into the conversation there our friend at the Anti-Defamation League, David Goldenberg. He joins me. David, thanks for being with us here on this Friday. I wanted to ask you first, say there are hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters in the streets of Chicago. Will that overshadow the DNC? Will that overshadow whatever the Democrats' message might be on the Israel-Hamas war here? And how can Democrats preempt these protests going into Chicago? Will they have to have an answer for how, if the war is still going on in Gaza, by November 5th and or by January 20th of next year, what their policies will be, David?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me. And I think it's important to recognize that whether it be the Republican convention, the Democratic convention, both are celebrations and symbols of our democracy and the democratic process. And so it is a celebratory moment here in Chicago, like it was in Milwaukee last month. But it's also important to recognize what some are trying to do to use that as a platform to advocate for issues that they care about. We are concerned as an organization that the intensity and the violence that we have seen at anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protests that have occurred in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles and New York and even here in Chicago, we're concerned that they serve as a prelude of a prologue of what could potentially happen next week. And so it's really important, and we've been calling on the city of Chicago from the mayor on down of the party to denounce the potential of violence and also be prepared that should violence occur, that they are prepared to respond and to reject it categorically.
David, all throughout the spring and summer, we saw these, massive demonstrations and encampments on college campuses nationwide of students, faculty, sometimes outside agitators making their voices heard. Students will be on campus very, very soon, if not right now, they are. Do you anticipate, does the ADL anticipate that depending on how the war is going, depending on how ceasefire negotiations are going, that this is going to pop up again, these protests on college campuses nationwide, to the magnitude, if not more, like we saw in the spring and summer here? We just brought our viewers the news a couple of days ago. Columbia University President Manu Shafiq resigning. And you can make the argument that part of that resignation was her role in handling some of those protests on Columbia's campus here. And how is the ADL preparing for that if it's going to come back in full force?
Yeah, look, we're saddened that another university leader has resigned under the weight of growing anti-Semitism on campus and their failure to respond in an adequate and appropriate way. We are absolutely concerned as we look to the fall that universities could again become, shall we say, the front line in the fight regarding anti-Semitism and just hate more broadly. And so what we're looking for universities as we look to the fall, what we're looking for them is, number one, to have the right policies in place, that they're able to take action if Jewish students and other students are harassed and vandalism occurs and even violence on college campuses. Number two, we're making sure that they're responsive to the types of incidents that could occur that we saw this past spring, where Jewish students were targeted with harassment and violence, and you saw campuses being vandalized. And number three, what are universities going to do as students return to set the ground rules for and the expectations for what they have on campus, or what is allowed on campus, and what the expectations are? Because ultimately, they need to make it clear that hate and anti-Semitism has no place on a college campus, and that those who bring anti-Semitism, those who bring hate to campus, will ultimately be dealt with within their codes of conduct and policies.
Okay, I want to put the shot up here still outside the United Center in Chicago. I mean, David, say there's 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, 20 protesters who get inside the hall there and really make a disruption to the primetime events there. How will Democrats respond? Do you anticipate that they're going to be, yes, we know disruptive outside, but inside as well?
Look, it's important to recognize that there are individuals, there are groups who have made it very clear what their intentions are, right? We have different protesting groups that are coming here, U.S. Palestine Action, others that have said, listen, we are going to protest outside of one of our city's lead commuter rail lines. And what we're going to do is we're going to do it under the banner of Make It Great Like 68. We know the intentions of some of these groups, and we have to believe them for what they say they're going to try to do. And should a disruption occur, should individuals get into the United Center and successfully disrupt, it's incumbent upon the party and party leaders to speak out and say, you know what? That's not our policy. That's not what we stand for. And we're not going to let you disrupt the democratic process.
So, David, Kamala Harris was confronted with something like this just last week at a rally. Her response, and I'm paraphrasing, was essentially, I'm speaking right now. And she, alluded to the fact to these protesters, do you want Donald Trump back in the White House? And I think she was getting at the fact that these protesters, in her view, possibly, are only helping Donald Trump. They're not helping fellow Democrats. What did you make of that response? Was it savvy? Was it misguided?
Look, I think it was clear that the vice president made it really clear that those types of disruptions into the democratic process were not going to be ultimately successful. Look, Jim Zogby, one of the leading pollsters, a leading Democratic pollster who's also a Palestinian American, was asked, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, was asked about a week ago, are you going to these protests at the DNC? And he said, no, I have no intention of attending them. I don't think that they serve our cause appropriately. And so, look, it'll be up to the Democratic Party to decide what occurs inside the convention center, or rather how they respond should something occur within the convention center, but also, frankly, what occurs outside of the convention center. And so, look, we've seen these protests and rallies that you're showing on your screen. We have seen an escalation in violence that, frankly, is not just highly problematic, but frankly, it's un-American. The burning of American flags. In Chicago, for one of the trainings of volunteers for this march, they were taught how to chant "Death to America" in Farsi, right? You've had burning of effigies of democratically elected representatives, and you've had bloodied heads of President Biden, masks of him held up, seen through blood and other sheds. Shall Gaza be redeemed? Listen, burning of American flags do not happen peaceful protests.
Okay.
Chanting of "Death to America" does not happen at peaceful protests. I got fired up about this because
I understand.
we're concerned. important.
Yeah, David, just lastly here, the political aspect of all of this, with who Democrats are catering to about voters, shares of the electorate, Jewish voters. Just yesterday, former President Donald Trump hosted an event at his country club there in Bedminster, New Jersey, Jewish Voices for Trump. The Harris campaign, in kind, hosted a Zoom call, Jewish Women for Kamala Zoom call. One of the key speakers on that Zoom call was the famous singer Barbara Streisand here. So what are the parties doing to cater to some of these, mini electorates, Jewish voters, Arab Americans, college students as well? And how are they threading that? I only say that because AIPAC, one of the most prominent pro-Jewish political action committees in the country, they've been very active. They've been very vocal this cycle in donating millions of dollars to the likes of the challengers of Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman here. They lost their primaries. Those progressive Democrats went down, and you can draw a straight line directly to their views on Israel, on Palestine, on Hamas, on the war here. And I think some Americans, maybe some Democrats, are saying, do we want that type of moneyed influence in our politics? Does it serve the voters well to have such a behemoth like AIPAC factoring into a primary election here? What does the ADL say about that?
Well, look, first of all, let's make it clear. Number one, political action committees don't decide elections, voters do. And the suggestion that there's Jewish money in types of elections, I just kind of disagree with the premise, right? So I think that that's important to be clear on. And I've done enough, and I've been involved in politics for 25 plus years in lots of different ways to know very clearly that candidates always look to appeal to blocks of voters based on the issues that they might care about. And I also know that Jewish voters are not single issue voters. It doesn't mean that Israel's not an important issue. And just like other people may have maybe single issue voters, American Jews vote across the board in bipartisan ways about lots of different issues. And so while, yes, in this particular moment, and likely beyond and even before, Israel is an important issue for many American Jews, it's not the only issue. And let's keep on remembering here that it's really important to point out that voters are the ones who decide elections,
Sure.
Not political action committees.
Okay, and just lastly, David, does the Democratic Party, in the ADL's view, have a problem with anti-Semitism?
I think the country has a problem with anti-Semitism, and it's the responsibility of both political parties to address it. Okay. ADL has tracked levels of anti-Semitism, and both parties, in a bipartisan way, need to address it.
All right, David Goldenberg there with the Anti-Defamation League. David, thanks so much for your insight, for your time on the eve of the DNC. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.